This week, YCN sat down with representatives of the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault to hear how federal immigration policy is affecting vulnerable members of our community.
The Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault are both statewide agencies, and so we don't particularly do direct services with individual survivors, but our member programs do. And so what we're hearing from our member programs is very much similar to the experiences that we've heard coming out of Denver, in terms of people are afraid to call law enforcement to report crime in the first place, and they're certainly afraid to walk into a courthouse and participate in either a civil process or a criminal process. And that's really, truly unfortunate. And so, while we have had, deportation for years, this is different in terms of the types of order that is now issued. You used to be able to say, I have a warrant for person X, but under the new orders, I can now go after X and Y if I see them and they look like maybe they were not born here, right? So that's really frightening for a lot of people. So it doesn't matter that ICE is not there for you, it's that ICE is there in the first place. And so a lot of survivors are saying, I would call the police and report this violence, but it's not worth my family being deported. Or if I go to testify and I don't have the right immigration status myself, or anyone in my family that would maybe support me in that court process, they're afraid to walk in the door. And unfortunately, that is the biggest catch-22 I think I've seen in almost 20 years of doing this type of advocacy. We have in place through our federal government both T and U visas, right? So a U visa is when someone who is undocumented, reports a crime, cooperates with the court, cooperates with the prosecution. After the end of that, as a survivor of crime, they can apply for a visa and be given provisional status and work their way up to legal permanent resident, right? But they can't even get in the door to do that now. So we've effectively shut off those thought out long-term provisions that we've had for decades. Same thing with trafficking. We absolutely expect to see labor trafficking go through the roof under this new order, in terms of, if I know that I can exploit somebody and they're not going to call law enforcement and they're not going to call out for help, why wouldn't I exploit them if I'm into that thing, right? And so, reporting for trafficking and cooperating with that prosecution would qualify for a T visa, right? We've created pathways under administration after administration to protect crime victims, and we've allowed them access to the courts, both the civil court and the criminal courts, because we recognize that no matter your status, you deserve to be safe in this country. And that is an American value. And so what is happening now, where we have broken the system and not allowed people to access rights that have been available to them for decades now, is really significant. And it's really an unprecedented time. And our advocates are seeing people file less civil protection orders, and certainly less people come forward and tell their stories. And that's unfortunate, because we know that, changes in trafficking or domestic violence haven't changed. It's that people don't feel safe in their own communities.
I will also like to add that it's also happening in the family court systems as well. It is happening there, and people are more cautious about even getting involved in the family court for any kind of situation, because again, it's happening just the same way that it's happening in the criminal court or the civil court. So.
And just for viewers who maybe don't know, what kind of things happen normally in family court?
So family court is where, so there's several different court systems, right? So family court is when people file for maybe divorce, when they file for what's in Colorado is called allocation of parental responsibilities or parental rights. And so if I am leaving a bad situation and I'm wanting to divorce this person, I would go to the family court for remedy. But I don't feel safe doing that now, because if I step into the courthouse and I don't look a certain way, I may not be safe, right? There's also civil courts, where we're also seeing a decrease in people coming forward, and civil courts are where people can go get an order of protection or a restraining order for things like domestic violence, sex assault, or stalking.
I think that they have been changes, like in all the different programs, just like Lydia mentioned it before. The survivors are really, really afraid of coming forward in any kind of situation. So now, instead of us really trying to breach the situation, breach the situation that for years we have been working about to really empower survivors to trust the systems, trust the police department or the courts. We're actually not seeing that again. And now we're faced as advocates to actually not even say anything, do it or not do it. We're in between the wall and
the rock and the hard place.
Rock.
Right. I mean, for decades, we've tried to work with marginalized communities to let them know that, you know, they do have options. They do have the right to safety no matter what their immigration status. And while we still really strongly believe those rights are still in place and should be in place, the current system is making it really difficult to exercise those rights for a lot of people.
And the survivors themselves are really, really challenging us. Like, do you really think that we have options?
Right.
And how about that?
Right.
How about this? And then
They're
we're
terrified.
like, we can't answer in any way. We're basically shut down.
So we know that domestic violence, sex assault, and stalking have always been underreported crimes, and they've always been underreported in marginalized communities, right? There tend to be, you know, smaller communities, people know each other, there seems to be bigger risks there. I think that reporting has already gone down and probably will not come back up until we make sure that people have access to the courts again. And, you know, when we've got plainclothes officers in the courthouses or around traditionally safe spaces, I don't see how they would feel safe to come forward, and that's truly unfortunate. What we have tried to do in response to helping our advocates around the state work through this is doing a lot of education in terms of, you know, what are people's rights and how do they safety plan around this, and, you know, things like making sure that you have duplicates of your documents and they're in a safe place. They're not at your home, but they're with a trusted person that can access those, and you have access to that person's phone number and can call them if something does happen and you are detained or questioned. Letting shelters know their rights around searches and seizures. Letting people know the difference between an administrative warrant and a court warrant and how to address both of those. And so we are trying to put those things out to members and to people in the field, but there's certainly tremendous agencies that have worked on immigration for much longer than what I have or what we do with a small part of this being for domestic violence survivors that are really trying to step up and trying to come up with some emergency planning for a lot of people.
I will say that with going along those lines, SICASA has been trying to work more closely with agencies like CERC, that provides immigration support for survivors. And when we're going out in the field, we are really hearing all those concerns. So we're trying to make the bridge between those communities and the agencies here in Denver metro area that can provide those supports to them.
I think all of this certainly goes to making our communities less safe, right? We have built our systems around people being able to see something and say something and speak up when this is happening to them. That's no longer an option for a good portion of our population right now, right? And so you cannot go forward in a criminal prosecution without a witness. And whatever those cases are that has a witness that is terrified to come testify, I think are in jeopardy of not being fully prosecuted. So I think that's probably a better question for the DA's office, but certainly, you know, survivors need unfettered access to civil and criminal courts, period. It makes our community safer, it makes individuals safer, and it's really sad that we don't have that right now. You know, for a lot of it, we're still trying to figure out what these new orders mean, what really is going to happen, and it's felt very fluid the last couple of weeks.
The other thing I will say is that if you're a person who is able to provide support, who has information that they can help these people in the community, just do so. Provide that information, help them, make a phone call and ask questions, because they might be even scared of doing those calls, or like go and take the drive if it's possible for you, for that person in the community who is afraid to even leave their house, because that's what some of the things that we have heard is like people is even afraid to leave their houses or to go and do any kind of gathering information. So if you're able to do so, please do so for them and bring them correct information and support them in any way or any case or way that they can.
And I mean, and to speak up and to be a good ally yourself too, in terms of there's a lot of organization, I think around CERC and other places that are trying to hold more Know Your Rights clinics and that sort of thing. And so being a good ally right now, learning the right information and spreading real information and not fear is certainly helpful. And then, certainly grassroots lobbying in terms of this is happening to our citizens in our country, in our own backyard, and what can we do to make sure that people are aware of this?
If you can raise that voice, raise it for those who have no voice.
Right, especially if you're a safe person to do so. So for domestic violence, they can call the national hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE. That hotline is answered in over 200 languages and will route somebody to an advocate in their community. And I feel like they're pretty aware of what's going on. It can help problem solve for domestic violence survivors that are finding themselves in that situation. We are working on seminars that are upcoming for our advocates that are going to teach more about this and figure out where we're at with the existing executive orders. But I think other than that, like the websites would typically be CERC and Servicios de la Raza.
Here in the Denver metro area, Servicios de la Raza provides a lot of information in relation to immigrants and immigrant issues. CERC, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition as well, they also have an agency here in the Denver metro area, and they also have representatives and locators in the different locations around the state. So